Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure. I am your host, Lonnie Jones. My wife Jackie and I moved to the city of Huntsville in 1986 for me to be a youth and family minister. I have been a minister since 1980. I have served in this community as a police chaplain assigned to a SWAT team since 1992, and I've been in private practice as a licensed professional counselor since 1998. I'm also an adventure educator and an avid outdoorsman. I dabble in rock climbing and I goof around with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Our life has been full of many wonderful experiences and some just outright adventures. I used to write about those things in a little church bulletin article. So now instead of asking you to read those things, we're just going to talk about them in our podcast. And as we talk about them, we're going to talk about the facts. The facts lead to concepts, and the concepts lead to application. One caveat about the facts is, for the most part, we're going to tell you the facts just as they happened. But every now and then, we're going to tell you the way other people have told us they remember it happening with a little bit of embellishment. It's all good, clean fun and for educational purposes. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy Keeping Up with Jones. TKM Incorporated in Moss, Tennessee is a construction company that specializes in erosion control, seeding, and soil, hydroseeding, hydromulch, minor excavation, and silt fence. They also provide traffic control and construction signs. Their business is keeping people safe, but their passion, their mission, is they wish that all men could be saved. TKM has adopted the nickname the King's Men because as they serve you, they also serve the King. If they could provide any of their services for you, please contact them at 931-243-3958. That is 931-243-3958. Or you can contact them on the net at tkminc2001@twlakes.net. That is tkminc2001@twlakes.net. TKM Incorporated is a sponsor of Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure. Songwriters David Vincent Williams and Philip A. White wrote the words, but I only heard them in the voice of Gary Laveau from Rascal Flatts. These words summed up a very difficult and scary time in my life. And I quote, "I've dealt with my ghost and faced all my demons, finally content with a past I regret. I find you found strength in your moments of weakness. For once, I'm at peace with myself. I've been burdened with blame and trapped in the past for too long. I'm moving on. I've lived in this place, and I know all the faces. Each one is different, but they're always the same. They mean you no harm, but it's time that I face it. They'll never allow me to change. But I never dreamed home would end up where I don't belong. I'm moving on." I thought about these words the other day when I found out that a minister friend of mine had been released from his duties. What he'd been told would happen isn't going to happen. The things that he planned for his future are no longer in his future. Now, please understand, churches are full of imperfect people. That's why we go. If you visit a church looking for perfect people, you're going to be sorely disappointed. But churches are full of imperfect people, and some of those imperfect people become leaders, and becoming a leader does not make the imperfections cease. You simply now have merely imperfect people in leadership positions, and you get imperfect leaders. These imperfect people make decisions, and many, many ministers have been there. And I don't want you to think I'm disparaging the church or even placing blame on the particular congregation that I may allude to in this discussion. We all arrive here with the capacity for imperfection. I showed up on this planet with the capacity for imperfection. And when we live up to that capacity, it should not discourage, depress, demean, panic, devalue, or disparage any of us. We're just simply living up to our imperfections. And when we experience imperfection, that's when maturity comes in, and you have to decide, am I going to let my circumstances control me, or am I simply going to control how I respond to my circumstances? It's just that most of the time when one party makes a decision like that, the reasoning is that they did what they did, and they decided what they decided because it was best for the company, it was best for the corporation, it was best for the congregation, or it was best for the bottom line. Now, once those avenues of thinking are used in the decision-making metric, you always get the accompanying phrase, and the sentiment is almost, well, we made this decision because of what's best for the congregation. We made this decision what's best for the corporation. We made this decision what's best for the community. We made this decision because it's best for the bottom line. And please understand that this is not personal. This is business. And be that as it may, it always seems like that one party is always impacted on a very personal level. When I transitioned into private practice, we made some agreements, and those agreements just were not kept. You see, I had this really weird, out-of-the-box, innovative idea that I was going to be a self-supported minister. I was going to generate my own income and with the church. Now there's a very distinct, I was going to work with the church. And working with the church means that my actual position would be like what I really was, a lay minister. The ministers in the churches of Christ aren't pastors, and we're not reverends. We're simply just normal people who actually work, in theory, with the church. Well, in full-time ministry work, you actually work for the church. I wanted to be no different than a deacon or a members of the ladies' auxiliary. I wanted to work with churches and not simply for churches. And so what I understood, what we had talked about in meetings with some of the leadership and then with a lot of the leadership, was that I would have a 6-month model. I was going to be able to do this thing where I'm working with the church, generating my own income, and then doing my youth ministry, much like a deacon would, not actually, salaried to do it, but had some, agreements with the church there. And what I understood, we're going to have a 6 months, and then we would reevaluate. We'd talk to the parent group. We'd talk to the teenagers and say, hey, is this working or is this not? And we'll continue or we'll change. Well, I'm supposed to start that agreement in January. Well, in September, and September comes before January, if you're in the previous year, I got a call from a young man in September who said, hey, I've been interviewed about the job that you're leaving. This guy was trying out for my job 4 months before the 6-month trial period had started. After going into private practice, I worked a long time with a church, and then they had a leadership change. Now, the new leadership considered me as working for them and not with them. And so after 14 years, I was told the church needed to hire a full-time guy. They said, hey, you've got this other job, and you do a lot of stuff with the kids on the weekends. You always do stuff with the kids on Sunday nights. You take them on a lot of trips, but you're really not available during the week. And so people are not really happy with your quote unquote, lack of availability. I've got a phone. I've got a cell phone. It never turns off. I'm available if somebody goes into crisis. Well, it turns out the guy who told me that was probably the only guy who was not happy. So 10 years later, they still have a part-time guy and not a full-time guy. It turns out the only thing that changed was the guy doing the job, not actually the job. And so what I was told and what actually happened, didn't exactly match. Now please, don't be mad at the church, and don't be mad at the people who administrate them, and don't have hard feelings on my part, even if you know who or where I'm talking about. It happens in lots of industries, and it happens to lots of folks. And in fact, it happens in every industry for that matter. Leadership, corporate, the board, the brass, whatever governing body or person has the ability to do or decide. And when they make this decision or they do this thing and it has a negative impact on us, those groups and those people are made up of people whose imperfections now have a greater ramification because they have the power to affect us. And they don't do it to be mean. It's not personal. It's just business. They have a vision and you don't fit into that vision, and that's not anything bad about you. It's just a change that they make. I remember working, I had a contract with a particular organization, and the guy that initiated the contract, the guy that talked to me about negotiating this contract and providing these services, this guy and I were friendly, if not actually friends. Now, I was doing some contract work for this nonprofit organization, and not only did this group accept my work, they accepted my donations. And they got my services at half my normal rate. And then I would donate a climbing or a rappelling trip or a self-defense seminar for their annual fundraising events. My quote unquote boss in this thing, the guy who initiated the contract, my contract person, the overseer, he had my private number. And he used it frequently and with impunity. If he wanted me to do something personal or professional within or without the parameters of the contract, all he had to do was give me a text or give me a call, and we'd work something out. I spoke at events. I did seminars. I did some recreation. And then out of the blue, one day I get a call from this guy's secretary. And she was very formal. She was calling on behalf of Mr. So-and-so and wanted to speak to Mr. So-and-so, and she set up a lunch meeting for us. Well, I showed up at the appointed place, and I sat down at the table, and I didn't order a meal, and I just drank my water. I'm not prescient. I don't have ESP, but neither am I naive. I looked at this guy and said, you have my number, and you use it for all kinds of personal reasons. And I know this is not a personal discussion, but a business discussion. So let's cut to the chase. Let's do this, and I won't waste my lunch. I won't lose my appetite, and I won't lose my lunch from my reaction to this type of preening, power, cowardly behavior. And as anticipated, we'd met in order to redo the contract, and I wasn't going to be a part of it. We were going to part company. It wasn't personal. It was just business. I no longer provide those services for this group for which I was retained. And after that, I've never been contacted again for the other things I did that weren't part of the business. I hadn't been asked to speak. I hadn't been asked to present. I hadn't been asked to donate. Nobody called to check on me when I was in the hospital multiple times. Nothing. Zero. Just radio silence. Now, I understand the decision was business, but it felt pretty personal. Now, it doesn't sound like it. It sounds like I'm retreading old wounds. And remember our discussion of I was hurt, but I wasn't injured. And it probably doesn't sound like, I got over it. But I tell you this only to share with you the fact that I know from experience what I'm talking about. This doesn't occupy a lot of my thinking. It just reminded me of all of this because when I got the phone call from my friend who told me he'd been treated in a similar way. Oddly enough, and to no one's surprise, the organizations that have parted company with me have carried on. The wheels didn't come off. The thing didn't fail to operate. The church that I was in full-time work with when I went into private practice over the last 25 years, they've hired 11 other ministers in that 25 years. The other church that I worked with for 14 years, they still have a part-time youth minister. And the organization that I had the counseling contract with, they have hired 2 new counselors, and one of which happened to be a wife of one of their board members. Go figure. As for me and Jackie, we've definitely been okay. We're blessed. We're healthy. We're busy with other ministries, other jobs, and other contacts and other contracts. So what am I whining about? And I hope it doesn't sound like I'm whining. I just wanted to give you some facts and say, if you're in this position, if you've been hired or fired or changed or riffed or whatever, I understand this. And I understand that when these things were told, it wasn't personal. It was just business. Imperfect people make decisions that for many reasons and for many ways, other imperfect people are affected by, yet they disagree with them. And usually those decisions, when they're made, hey, we need to change this, we need to let you go, the way they do it may seem bad. It may be bad form. It may be disingenuous. It may even feel dishonest, but it's rarely vindictive. It's rarely punitive. That is to say, people make unpleasant decisions that affect us in unpleasant ways, and it's not personal. It's business. Now, when you quit, when you change, when you leave, when you retire, if they retire you, if they fire you, if you walk out, they will find someone else to do what you do. You'll find something else to do, or you'll find a different place to do the same thing you were doing. Now, in some cases, the replacement will not do it as well as you did. And in other instances, it will be believed that they do it much better than you ever did or could do. The point is, someone else will do it. They will replace the guy who replaced you. Hey, they'll replace the guy who replaces Saban. And by the way, Saban is the guy who replaced the bear after a few failed attempts. It's not personal. It's business. So don't get blinded or obsessed or let the business keep you from doing the things that are personal. As a spouse, as a parent, as a sibling, as a son, those are jobs that are reserved for you personally. Please don't give the best part of your passion, of your time, of your energy, of your focus, and of your priorities to something or someone where you can and will be easily and immediately replaced. I had an awakening one day when I realized I was being paid to do things with other families that I wasn't being allowed to do with my own family. I had that discussion with the climbing guide in North Carolina who reminded me where his office was. And then years and years and years ago, Jackie said something, and it was honest. She wasn't being mean. She wasn't mad. She wasn't angry. She knew I was hurting. She knew I was burned out. She knew I was sad. I was looking into doing a different job. I was looking into pursuing something that had some dangerous implications to it. And I was young enough to have been able to do a job like that. And Jackie sat down with me, and she was holding my hand, and she said, I don't think you can do this particular job with any real balance. She said, I think you would expose yourself unrealistically to danger simply because of who you are and the way you pour yourself into things. When you're passionate about something, they get all of you. And she said, if you do this and you only do it for 5 years, but you're you while you're doing it, I'd rather have my Lonnie for 5 years than this Lonnie for the next 25. I recognize that this wasn't business. It was personal. So that place that you leave home for, that thing that you do away from home, those hours they buy from you for you not to be with your wife or your kids or your parents or your siblings, when they get all they can out of you and when you are through doing it, they will give the job and the money to someone else. And they'll do it the very next day, the day you stop doing it. Generally speaking, your family can't replace you. Now, your spouse can remarry, and your kids can be raised by adoptive or surrogate parents, or family members can do wonderful things in your absence. But that assumes things like death and divorce and disability. I'm just telling you that if someone has to suffer from your absence, if somebody has to suffer from your lack of focus, if somebody needs to be neglected or end up on a lower priority, why not make it something that has a business and not a personal connection? And if we pour ourselves into things that anyone can do, but neglect the things that are uniquely ours to do, the things that are uniquely ours to be, a dad, a friend, a husband, a son, if we fail at those things, if we neglect those things, if we miss those opportunities, then the failure will not be business. It will be personal. Using the tool of shortwave radio, World Christian Broadcasting literally covers the world every day with the gospel. They use 2 large curtain antennas. One is located in Anchor Point, Alaska, and the other in Madagascar. They send out messages that are recorded at their international home in Franklin, Tennessee. They make available 40 hours of broadcast every day. The broadcasts are made in English, Chinese, Russian, Spanish, Portuguese, Korean, English for Africa, and Arabic. They would love for your group to visit them. You can bring your ladies group, your youth group, or your men's group. Just give them a call at 615-371-8707, 615-371-8707, or you can go to 3Ws and a dot, worldchristian.org, find the Donate Here button, and make a financial contribution to support this work that literally covers the world every day with the gospel. World Christian Broadcasting, in cooperation with Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones Podcast Adventure.